Welcome, everyone, to the Special Education Inner Circle podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Witcher, and I'm excited to talk to you today about the hot topic of general education teachers and the IEP. What's the deal? So first, I need to give a shout out to a special education teacher that you can find on Instagram at Full Sped Ahead. And she did a little shout out about the podcast and put it in terms that I love. She said, if you are tired of all the frilly, it'll get better podcasts for special ed, check out the Special Education Inner Circle. She keeps it real with no BS. And I share that with you, one, so you can go find Heather over at Full Sped Ahead. But two, because we're just going to say it like it is today. And there's a big disconnect between special education and regular education on a good day. And we all know in education, due to this virus crisis, we haven't had a good day in a long time, at least not how it used to be. So when I asked out on Facebook, I was saying, how does the general education teacher show up in the IEP meeting? Like, what do they do for you? And I had parents and teachers basically confirm that nothing has changed since the time that I was in the classroom over 20 years ago, that there's not typically a big role for a general education teacher at an IEP meeting. Now, let me first off just say, I love all teachers. And there's always exceptions to this situation. In fact, I know of a great situation for one of my clients that I had for a really long time, where the entire room was full of general education teachers and one special education teacher because the child was in general education the entire time. And it was just a situation where it really was the gen ed teachers driving the IEP plan. And it was a great situation. That is not the typical situation. Okay. The typical situation is that perhaps a child who is in special education, who's in a self-contained classroom, who goes to specific classes such as art or music or gym with their same age peers who are in general education. Maybe the gym teacher shows up to the IEP and gives some input about how things are going. That's not good enough. Or maybe the student goes into, they're in second grade and they go into the general education second grade class for reading time. Yet the reading teacher or the classroom teacher that they went to for that reading class doesn't come to the IEP. That's a problem, or doesn't have input, or hasn't gathered information for the IEP team to know. That's a problem. So a general education teacher should absolutely be assisting her students who have IEPs in meeting their goals and modifying their work and making sure that they have access to extracurriculars that her classroom or the school is participating in. There's a lot of options for a general education teacher to have a really positive, awesome impact inside of an IEP team. So here, as we've been working through virtual learning, hybrid learning situations, and all this different stuff, there's some things that have really come to the surface. And I've said this quite a few times, the problems that you're seeing right now that feel really big in special education because of the school shutdowns and what we're kind of recovering from with all of the schools being closed and now just slowly opening back up. These are not new problems. This is a magnifying glass of what is already been happening, and now it just feels bigger. So, for example, I have a lot of parents who have children in special education who are saying, I know my child used to go to general education for certain classes, but I've never even heard from that teacher anymore. And maybe even this new school year, they were assigned a new general education teacher, but I haven't heard from that teacher. That's very common. And typically, in an average school year, you wouldn't have heard from them either. So that's a problem. Quite honestly, behind the scenes, special education teachers and regular education teachers typically do not communicate the way that they could, the way that they should, to make sure that the child is accessing all the classrooms in the school environment in the way that they need to. That has become even more apparent during this shutdown where you're not even in the same building with your fellow colleagues. So to reach out and chat and collaborate with somebody, it takes even longer. And that communication between regular education and general education, it has broken down even further. The other issue that we see a lot with general education teachers and IEPs is the lack of time or knowledge on how to modify activities or how to implement accommodations. And that's become really apparent from all of the students who are getting work that's not appropriate, especially for distance learning. So again, this has been an issue for a long time. Having been a teacher myself in the past, and you guys know right now, we are in our Master IEP Coach mentorship session. And there's a next one that's coming up in February. You can find out more about that at masteriepcoach.com. But we talk a lot about how to get the entire team to work together and to work on these accommodations and modifications and getting the general education teacher involved. And this is super important. But here's the thing. The modifying work or making accommodations may have worked, like that lack of knowledge that may have worked in the past as a reason for not being able to assist a child with their IEP or working on their goals or working on the curriculum. But I'm watching general education teachers really close right now, and they're doing a ton of modifications and accommodations for their own lesson plans for their own students in regular education like never before because of virtual learning. And I'm thinking, oh goodness, you're now getting like skilled in being able to adapt things. And let's not lose this skill. Let's make sure that when you do get back to your classroom and when we do get back to whatever that new normal is going to be in education, that you continue to put the time and effort into making modifications and accommodations so all students can access the curriculum, even when it's not like everybody else, even when you're in a different kind of situation. You're going to have so much practice now. So a shout out to all the general education teachers. Like, you're going to have so much practice now in making these adaptations that you should be a rock star at it. So when you have that one student or three students or five students that need some things adapted, you're going to have a lot more tools in your toolbox. Now, let's call out a couple of other things that need to change, that can change, that should change, that really this needs to happen when we get back into school. And that is for all general education teachers to learn how to read IEPs and know how it applies in their classroom for each individual student. Now, some parents who are hearing this right now just said, what? Of course this should be happening. Every teacher behind the scenes will tell you that doesn't happen. And it's not always the general education teacher's fault. Quite honestly, I have been in enough schools and talked to enough teachers that I know that it is quite possible that the regular education teacher has never seen the IEP that is attached to your child or some of her students. They don't know what sections apply to them. They've never written an IEP goal. They don't know how to look at the accommodations and modifications section. They don't know any of those pieces. It's something that is typically not taught in any of their college classes. There's not professional development on that. It's something that they learn as they go when they're collaborating with their fellow teachers. It's also something that is not typically at the top of their priority list because they're doing so many other things in their role as a general education teacher. But this is something that needs to move forward and become a priority. Now, how do we make that a priority? This actually needs to come from the parents. Parents, you have a voice that says that you want the entire team trained on being able to serve your child at school, meaning whether it's being able to collaborate in a group lesson, or it's how to communicate with peers, or it's what prompts need to be used. There's all different things that could be approached with a general education teacher on what needs to happen for your child to be included in their class or for your child to have access to the curriculum in their class. But parents, you need to make this a priority to make sure the entire team is trained, including the general education teacher. I will tell you, one of the most heartbreaking things that I see in special education is when a child is using alternative communication. So maybe an iPad that has a specific communication app on it, and they're being included in a general education activity. However, that general education teacher and the peers in that room have zero idea how to communicate with the child who's using alternative communication. This is something that can be put into the IEP, and we can ensure that the teacher knows how to communicate with the student who's being included. I know this sounds basic. Some of you guys just said, oh my goodness, I had no idea this is happening. It does happen. It happens all the time. So let's make sure that general education teachers know how to read the IEP, and let's know what they need to be accountable for. Let's give them a specific role on the IEP because they do matter and they do have knowledge that can help all students. So whether it's the gym teacher, art teacher, music teacher, classroom teacher, there are things that they can be doing to ensure that the IEP is being implemented in their classroom, and they need to be accountable for those. But again, that accountability is going to have to come from the parent. It can come from a proactive voice. It can be positive. It does not have to be combative. You can make this happen. If you're thinking exactly how do you make that happen, and that you want this and you're feeling in your gut like, oh my goodness, I need to make this happen, I'm going to encourage you to hop over to specialedinnercircle.com. That's where we have our in-depth conversation inside of the Special Education Inner Circle. And it's an extension of this conversation. It's the tools that you need to put this into action so you're not doing this alone. So again, that's at specialedinnercircle.com. Here's the other piece. We need to make sure that there's follow through. So a lot of times we have the general education teacher who's in part of the IEP process in some way, but they're not always told what they're accountable for, or if they are accountable, we don't have a direct follow through process. So whether that's regular communication between the general education teacher and the parent, whether that is follow through where the general education teacher is included in some team meetings with the IEP team on a regular basis, not necessarily an IEP meeting, but like a teacher team meeting where they meet about students and figure out what to do next. They troubleshoot, they come up with creative plans, all the different things. Okay. So we need to make sure there's follow through, because a lot of times you'll experience a general education teacher showing up to the IEP meeting and then leaving, and nothing has changed. There's not additional information that's given to the general education teacher to give them a role and responsibility on the IEP. And when they don't feel that, they don't follow through on that. So I've given you a lot of pieces of what happens between general education and special education. There's a lot more to this conversation. I've just touched on some of the things, but if you're feeling frustrated in the current situation, where you're like, I don't even know where the general education teacher is at. My child works with the special education team most of the time, but I know they were supposed to be involved at some level. You know what? Follow that gut instinct that your child needs to be involved more in the school community. To get involved in the school community, we need the general education teachers to understand their roles in the IEP, what they're accountable for, and how we can follow through with them to make sure they know that they're a meaningful piece of that IEP. Again, I'd love to continue this conversation with you. We've just touched on a little bit of it, but can join me in the Special Education Inner Circle at specialedinnercircle.com. We can take this conversation to the next level and help you get your general education team at your school involved with your child to ensure that they are included in all different activities at a whole new level. All right, everyone, I'll talk to you soon.